Hey everybody, welcome to this webinar. As you guys are coming on, I'd just love to hear from you in the chat where you're joining us from, and we'll get started. This webinar is about the guest connection process. And my name is Katie. If we haven't met before, if you haven't been on any of our webinars, I'm glad you're joining and taking this time to focus on how we can use our database effectively. And I work at Trinity Church in Lansing, Michigan. I've been there over 10 years in a variety of roles. And right now I serve as kind of like the creative director. And but previously, for several years, I led the hospitality team. So the guest connection process was something that put together and made some changes in. So we're going to talk about how we use the guest connection process and how we use CCB to really run our connection process for us with process cues. So by all means, this is not the only way you can do it. I'm going to show you how we used to do it and then how we've recently, in the last 2 years, simplified it. So, and the different aspects of CCB that we use. So, welcome everybody. Great to see some familiar faces on here and some new people. So, welcome. Glad you guys can join us. So, how this works is I'll go through the content that I have, and please put any questions you have in the chat as I'm talking, and I'll either answer them right then or at the end. We'll take some time to answer questions. So let's dive in. All right. With the connection process, we first want to start with 2 questions when you're thinking about it. So even before we get to the database, there are some questions that we have to address, and I really like to plan it all out. I'm a big whiteboard person, or like those giant Post-it note things that you can stick on the wall. I love those things. So 2 questions we want to ask with connection process is, what is the essential information that you need from a person to connect with them? So, do you need their email address, phone number, address, birthday, wedding anniversary, maiden names, whatever, do you need all of that? Or like, what is the simplest and the essential information that you need? So first figure that out. And then what does connection look like in your context? So what I mean by this is, you may be in an area of the country or a church that it's not weird to receive, or it's expected to receive, a handwritten note when you go to someone's house or when you're building a relationship with someone, or it's expected that you get a gift. In other contexts, that might be really weird to get a gift when you go somewhere. You also, a phone call maybe feel very intrusive to the context and community that you're in, or a text may feel very impersonal. So just kind of thinking through all of those. There is no shortage of resources and opinions of how the connection process should be, but you have to decide what works best for your context and your community. So that brings us to how we used to do our connection process. So this was our old connection card. Here it is. It's the standard size that they come in. And so this didn't work for a variety of reasons. One, the darkness. It was hard for people to write in the white spaces. So sorry, I also designed these cards, so I'm going to drift a little bit, but I'm going to try to keep it focused on CCB stuff. But you can see how we ask for their address, name, email, address, phone number, and then we have, like, if they're new or a regular attender, to update the information. And then if they have a specific question, those are like different ministries or next steps. And then on the back, thoughts and prayer requests, and if they want to share it with the church family or if it's confidential. So this is what we used to have, and this is what our process used to be. Now this we adapted, I think it was from Text in Church. But you can see the green is like before you get into the database. So it's just all those basic things of first impressions. And then once they got into the database, they received a phone call on Monday or Tuesday. And then also in the first week, they received a handwritten note from our pastor. And then week 2, 3, 4, and 5 was a series of emails. So the first one being our pastor's story and a survey that they could fill out. And then the next one was the Trinity story and upcoming opportunities. From this point forward, the emails got very customized based on what they had selected in the survey, based on what they were clicking on in the email. It was extremely customized and it was very complicated. Um, so I am showing you this because this is what we used to do. We don't do this at all now. A lot of the green is still the same up at the top, and feel free to screenshot this. Like, that's why I'm showing it to you guys. There's nothing wrong with this by any means. This is a very thorough plan. It just didn't fit our vibe, and we weren't seeing a really, for lack of a better term, a return on our investment. Like, we weren't seeing a lot of people getting connected, and the emails, they were effective, but by week 3 or 4, people stopped opening them. So just looking at the data, we could see like, hey, this isn't really working for us. So we switched to these two cards. So the top is our green welcome card. And you can see on the top, now we just ask for phone number and email. And we do that because we stopped sending a handwritten note. It was a little over the top for people. A lot of people didn't feel comfortable giving us their address, which is understandable. But then you can see I want more information about. We still kept those the same. And I'll talk through how all of this plays out into CCB. And then our communication. So whether it's an email or a text that they prefer. Now you will notice on the top one, there's still a lot of white space. That is because it allows people to give us their address if they want. We have actually seen an increase of people giving us their addresses when we haven't asked for it. So go figure, ironically. The bottom card is our black prayer card. And you can see there we just asked same thing, first, last name, phone number, email, and then a lot of blank space. So the reason we separated out the prayer card and the welcome card are a couple of reasons. One, this cut down dramatically on those anonymous opinions of the service. Hopefully, we're not the only church that gets those. So people are less likely to write their opinions on a prayer only card than when it said thoughts and prayers. And we do that because we encourage people to just talk to us directly instead of doing an anonymous one. And then we also use these cards in our prayer gatherings throughout the week. So if a ministry has a prayer gathering or we have like a corporate prayer worship night throughout the week, we use these cards for that. And then we're not confusing people with all of that other information on a connection card. It's just focused on prayer. So these have been very effective. We have actually seen a huge increase in people using these two cards versus this one with more information. So, again, though, that's our context. So, this is how, at a high level, how our process works. And then I will go into, we'll jump into CCB and I'll walk you through each step. So, we have the paper cards that they get collected, and then a person enters those in to our check-in form on Monday. And then our online audience can also check in with the check-in form. So, and in-person people can use the online form. We just have a short link for it that we give in the service. So it's probably 50-50. But then the check-in form goes to, depending on what they check, which we'll talk about, it either goes into an online campus group if they're watching online, or it goes into our guest connection process, which has the ministry interest process cues and other ways to get connected. And then or it goes into if they left a prayer request, it goes into our prayer request process, which then is a weekly prayer mail merge that goes out with the prayer requests that were submitted. So, that's a very high level look at what our connection process looks like. So now we're going to jump into CCB. All right, we're going to start in forms. So you can select that over on the left-hand side. And I've duplicated all of our stuff, so there's none of our personal information in there. But so this is what the form looks like. You would publish it. I'm not publishing it because this is just an example. So over here, you're going to go over to actions and do edit this form. So with our check-in form, what we also do is every year we duplicate it and start fresh. We do that for a number of reasons. One is it makes reporting and numbers so much easier when you don't have to worry about what the date is. Um, we also, which I'll show you, we sometimes have like seasonal questions that we add to the check-in form. If there's a specific initiative or a specific resource that we want to get people and that they can sign up for. And then we hide that when it's no longer available. So it just keeps the form clean when we duplicate it every year and start fresh. So this is what it looks like. You can see we only require the email to be filled out. But we have the mobile phone showing. And then they can check if they're new, if they're joining online or in person. If they click online, then that goes to our online campus group that we have in CCB. And then it's the same thing. So identical to what we have on the paper card is what we have here. And then same signing up for the communications. Obviously, we're able to put a little more detail in an online form versus a card about what things are, but they can check those things. And then this is a new thing that's not on our paper card, but we're doing clustering people together based on where they live. So then they can provide care and connection for each other in their neighborhood. And then down here, you can see share my prayer request. Now, just the basics of how a form works is you can see these gears are on pretty much every question. That means that there's an automation attached to it. So like I said with this one, so if we click it, it'll pop up and you can see over on the right, automations is a connection phone call. So that's our first step in our connection process, which I'll show you in a second. But you can edit these by just clicking on it. A new window pops up, and then you can add another automation. So maybe I want this one to go to a process queue, and if they select that they're new to Trinity, I also want to add them to a group. And then I would just start typing that group in there and then hit save. So you can also automate people into an event or into a specific serving position. So if you have a volunteer form, you could do that. So save that. And then you can see we don't require any of these except for the online or in person. And that's because they might not be new to Trinity and we don't want them to check, no, they're not new. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for somebody to fill this form out. So that's the main reason why we don't require a lot of things on this. And then with the share my prayer request, you can see you can't automate, like if somebody fills out like this box, you can't automate that, unfortunately. And you also can't right now, hopefully that's something CCB will change or PushPay will change in the future. These aren't logic-based forms. So it's not if somebody checks that they do have a prayer request, then this field appears. Everything is going to appear. Now, the exception to that is if, let's say, we stop doing this neighborhood cluster thing and I don't want this on the form anymore. if somebody has filled it out and information is attached to that field, you can't delete it. But what you can do is check this admin only. And then what that does is that keeps it, you can still see it as an admin when you like log in to edit the form, but it doesn't appear publicly. So if I do this and then hit I'm finished, there we go. I'm going to do, oh, I have to when the form is published, you can do fill out a form for another person. And so we're going to fill this out for Mickey Mouse. And you can see that neighborhood clusters question is not appearing because we checked that admin only box. So that is how that looks. Now, if you have any questions about automations or anything, please ask. Be happy to go over that again. With the paper cards, so on Monday, our volunteer gets all of our cards, and then she comes in and she says actions, and then starts filling out a form for another person. So she is entering their information. And if we have them in the database, it'll automatically populate with the contact information. So you can see we have Mickey Mouse in the database. So it put in the email and phone number that we have. If you're filling this out and maybe we got a new email for Mickey, we didn't get their junk email one, we got their real email address. We changed that. You want to be sure to check this box that you want to update Mickey's profile with this information. If you don't check that box, then it doesn't change anything in their profile, which is kind of annoying. But so be sure that box gets checked. It's very important. And then you're going to go through, and obviously because it's a card that you're filling out, it's always going to be in person. And so you're checking that, you're going through, and then you're hitting submit. Once you hit submit, actually I should have just done that. Sorry about this. All right. Once you hit submit, you can see that they're matched to a profile. If we didn't have the person in the database, then you would be entering all of that information in, and then they would be unmatched, and you would have to create their profile. Let me see. Trying to think of what. All right. I'm going to do this really quick. This is also a trick we do. If they didn't leave an email address, but they did leave a phone number, we do na@na.com. All that does is it allows you to submit the form, and then when you go to send an email, it just removes the email from the database. So it's like no harm, no foul, but it's a quick way that you can do that, because when it's paper, they can put whatever information they want. So just a little trick. So we're going to say Iron Man is new. It's going to grow in his faith. And he submitted, we won't have a submitted prayer request. So he wants to grow in his faith and he wants to get baptized. So we're going to submit this. So you can see here, we have one that's matched and one that's unmatched. What that means, if we go to the response tab, you can see them listed here. You do match responses. So here are all the ones that are unmatched. So I'm going to go match person. And then I'm going to start typing. So you can type the person and then you can make them a guest because we know they're new. And then if you want people to be logging into your database and using the database, you can check send a login activation email. That probably, though, would be kind of weird for a guest to receive. So I don't know that I would do that for this. But then you hit save. and that matches them. Once they are matched, they then can go into your process and they get added to the groups. Whatever the automation was, they get added into that. Now, the practice that we have is for forms, and this is forms in general, guest connection process or not. We just have one form manager per form. And the reason for that is then it's super clear the expectation on that person to match the forms or match the responses, excuse me. And that's really just for clarity's sake. Now, someone who has the form admin privilege can see all of the forms, but we try to just have one, maybe two if it is like if you really have to have the forms matched, and you're concerned that the person's not going to do it on a specific day or whatever, you could have more. But our general rule is we just have one person that's a form manager because the form is like the first step. It's like walking into the front door of your database. So once they're matched, then they get put into everything else. And let's go into the processes. So processes are now in people, and you can click the processes tab at the top. And then we're going to go to this one. I just realized that this will, yep. Okay. So this is what our process looks like. And we have our entire connection process in one process. I'll show you what I mean by that. So first we have our weekend gathering connection process. Now you're going to you have these cards or, whatever your check-in form looks like, but you also have children's check-in if you utilize that. And that is another great way to get guest information. So we used to have two separate processes. So we had a family connection process, and then we had like an adults connection process. But what happens? Well, there was a lot of overlap. What if a parent checks in and then they fill out the connection form and then they're on these two tracks getting bombarded with information, right? So it just didn't make sense. So we simplified and combined everything. So now when a parent checks in, they are added to this queue for the first time if a new kid, and they're added to the connection phone call. So everybody gets added to this that selects that they're a guest, and then they start to get moved down into the process. So we do, the parents get a 90-day phone call. We only do a 30-day follow-up phone call for everybody else, but parents get a 90-day check as well. And then we, on the third week of, it's actually so the last Sunday of the month, we do a meetup in the atrium with all of our guests. And so that invite goes out on the third week. So let's look at these. I'll keep going down. All right. So if you remember the check-in form, the I want more info about, we had these different options. So all of these go, if they select one of those, they automatically end up in one of these process queues. And these process queues are attached to different ministries, depending on what ministry it is. And then I'm not going to go into detail with this stuff, but these are our other connection processes that we have within our church. So Impact and Crosswalk are what we call our youth group, middle school and high school youth groups. And then our Trinity at Home is what we did during the pandemic. We called it Trinity at Home, and it had its own connection process because it had its own team of volunteers that are ministering to our remote and online campus. All right, so this is what a process looks like. Each of these are process queues, so let's look at this first visit. Every process queue has the same setup where it has this top information, and then this area right here is your gold mine. You really want to be sure to fill this out. This is the description of what to do. And the reason this is important is you may have somebody leave. You may have a team of volunteers that are working in this process, and you need to have clear instructions on what it means when you mark someone done, like what happens, what does that mean? What does it mean when someone's in process? What does it mean when someone's waiting? And how that looks is, let's add friend Mickey Mouse. All right. So if Mickey Mouse is in here, and you can see we add our newly registered children by this says report. It should say save search. Our registration volunteers do that when the services are done. They go in, they run the search, and they add everyone to this queue. And then, so when you mark it as done, there's not really a whole lot of action because it's an email. So when you mark this as done, you can see it's going to change the membership type to check and guest, and it's going to send them an email of the welcome process and first time guest email. So that's a mail merge that we've done. And then the next queue is going to be a connection phone call. Now, you can leave it unassigned, or if you have a team of volunteers. So we have a small group of volunteers that make these phone calls for us. And some of them are more geared, like they're more knowledgeable for families, and others, are just general knowledge. So we may assign them, or we may not. It just may be left unassigned. So then you would mark as done. And then I'll just do it. That email can go out. That's fine. So, and that's how it looks. Then they disappear. And you can see over here, you can see the stats of how many you have processed in a given time. Now, how you add this information is you can either add queue managers. So that would be the people that are assigned to just this step in the process. And for a step like this, where it's purely just marking everybody as done that ends up in there, like that, I would just have one person assigned to, because it's pretty simple. And then you can do edit this queue. This is where you would add the instructions. So the more detail you can add, this is actually pretty sparse for us. Typically we have more information, especially for like a volunteer process. But you want to be sure everything is clear. So if somebody just got dropped into this process, they would at least have a good idea of what was expected of them. In details, you can set if the due date is for immediate, which would be 0, or if maybe it's like in a week we want this action to take place, you could do 7 days. You also have all of these options. There's no shortage of options that you can do. So you can also notify the queue managers a specific number of days before the deadline. And then these two little check boxes are important. They are if you want the person to get the queue manager to get an email when it's either assigned to them, or do you want all queue managers to get it when a person is not assigned to anybody? We typically leave both of these checked, but that is up to you. And then automations. There's not a whole lot of options here, but there are a good number. So you can add somebody to a group, a specific volunteer position, an event. You can change their membership type to something. You can change their status if they've been baptized or not. That's like yes or no. And then you can send a specific mail merge. Now you can see these are you only get one answer. So it can't be a process queue can't be, you could either send this mail merge or this mail merge. They would have to be separate process queues because you can only have one mail merge attached to one process queue. And then the queue sequencing. So you can add, and these you can add as many as you want. I really don't think there's a limit. I have one process for our VBS that has probably 20 queues options. So You can either have it be for the process that you're in, or maybe you have a queue that you need to send somewhere else. It needs to go to a different process, maybe a serving process or a specific ministry process. So it can go somewhere else. And then you pick the specific queue that you want it to go to next. Now, these 3 columns, this first one is it's checked automatically and you can't undo it. In the mark is like when you mark as done in that pop-up window, you can't not do those things in that are highlighted or selected in this column. Now, these 2 columns are optional. So, you can either have it checked by default, which means like 90% of the time, that's going to be the next step for the person. But you may want to deselect it. Or you can do that it's unchecked by default and it's more of an optional thing. So, an example of this would be like an event registration where maybe there's like 3 rooms that somebody could go in, like they're a 3rd grader and there's 3 options of rooms. So, I would have those all be unchecked by default because I'm selecting what they go into. So, once you get this how you like, then you can go to save. And there you go. So that's what the queue looks like. Now you can see because we marked Mickey Mouse is done, he's now into our connection phone call. And with this one, this is a phone call. So there's no action that's taking place within the database. But our hospitality team would come in here and say, okay, Mickey Mouse, and they can hit accept. And so that means that they're taking responsibility for this phone call. And then you can see their phone number is up there. And so make that phone call. And then I would add a note. And we just ask like to give any details that are important, not things that are personal or anything, but like the questions that they may have or anything that needs to be followed up with. And then we typically just keep it in this process. Again, I think I said in a previous webinar, we just want people to forget that only me option is available. We don't want people using that. So either appropriate leaders or this process only, depending on what the process is. So, but as a queue manager, you get access to seeing, so this is the notes tab, the process queue, maybe they're in other process queues. If they filled out any forms, what their involvement would be. This would be their list of groups and that sort of thing. With a guest, you're not going to have this, of course. And then family members. So this is just helpful when you're making a phone call. You can, if they're married, you can call them by their spouse. And you can also notice, like, if they say they're married, but we don't have their spouse listed, we can get that information and we can add that to their profile. So we're able to connect with them better going forward. So you just want to be sure that you're getting all of that. Now, we require that if they leave a voicemail, then they also follow up with a text message. So they would just leave that note in here, like, I left a voicemail and I also texted them. And sometimes we have, like, sometimes people put what they texted. I don't think we require that, but. And then you would mark as done. And then you can see here, this goes into week 2. They get a text message from us. They get a 30-day follow-up call, and they are added to our meetup invite. So all 3 of those queues happen at the same time when I hit save. So now you can see when we go back that those have all been added. So that is how this process works. And we just move through that every single week. Now, if someone had selected down here, they had selected they want to grow in their faith or they want to get baptized. Now, baptized actually goes into our baptism process. So that's a different one. But if they, and the same for membership, that was another selection. But if they selected growing in my faith, mail merge is attached to that. Children and students, if they got that an email goes to our next gen team and they get notified and it goes through. You can see how that works. So, and each ministry has their different set of parameters or how they respond to those. But we do have you can have a process manager where they get access to the entire all of the queues. They can see everything. And so our process managers are responsible for making sure that we don't have a lot of red. By Wednesday, Thursday, they're checking it and saying, "Hey, uh, children and students, it looks like you've got 10 people listed there that are still not started. What's going on with those? What's the status? Can I jump in and help?" So we want to make sure that we're responding quickly when people are asking to take their next step, because that's a big deal. So that is how our connection process works. Are there any questions thus far from people? Now, I guess I can show you guys the mail merges. Let me see if I can find those. All right. Our mail merges. And this is where using your naming conventions are very helpful. It's also helpful to remember what the naming convention is. Sorry about this, guys. I'll just show you this one. All right. So if somebody fills out a prayer request, they go into our prayer request process. And if they selected that they wanted to share it with their church family, then they would get this email. And this is attached to the process queue. So they go into that process queue, and then we just mark everybody as done, and then it shoots out to them. So this is an example of an email that we sent during the pandemic. So we were more insistent that people fill out our check-in form during the pandemic, especially when we were shut down, so we could keep connection with people. And actually, let me go back to that. With the mail merges, just like a quick little tip, you can edit who can send as me. Anyone with the mail merge admin privilege can use that. And so you want to be sure that these emails are coming from a person that makes the most sense. Now, I sent during the pandemic a weekly email to everyone in our church, kind of checking in with them. So it made sense for the prayer requests emails to come from me. But for your church, it may make more sense that it comes from the pastor or from the groups person, whoever. So you just want to be sure that you're sending it as the correct person, whoever makes sense. You can also use your general. If you have a fake account of your general one, you could use that here too. But just kind of keep in mind, this is just my personal opinion, but I think an email from a person is more personal. So especially with something like this, with a prayer request, and the season that we were in, we wanted people to know that it was actual people that every day were praying for these requests that were coming in. So that is just an example of how you can do this. Again, there's no right way to do this. There's a lot of different options for how you can do this. So does anybody have any questions? I think that's all I got for you guys. I want to close if you've done these webinars before, it would pain me, it would hurt my heart if we just watched these webinars and then went about our day, because I want to lead you guys to action. So the action step I have for today is just one. It is, what is the one thing you can implement before Easter? So hopefully at our churches, we get a lot of guests for our Easter services, whatever they may look like. And so it's a great time to take a look at your connection process, shore that up, and maybe you need to digitize your cards and make a form on that mirrors what the paper card is, maybe you need to create a process and walk through the different steps that you have. Or maybe your process is a little too complicated and you need to uh, simplify it. Melissa, oh, thank you. Makes your head swirl. I don't like that. Um, would it be helpful? It's kind of hard to do live, but would it be helpful if I just walked through how to do it from scratch? We do have some time. Oh, I am sorry, guys. That's not what I wanted. I wanted to bring some clarity. That's the problem with sharing processes. But I would say the first thing you do is whatever your connection card is, or maybe you have a clipboard that people are checking into when they walk through. All right, we'll go through the processes. 1 second. Let me reset my screen. Excuse me. All right. Add it to screen. All right. We're back at the processes page. And we got to the processes page by going to people on the left and then processes tab at the top. Now, you can only create a process if you have the process admin privilege, or if you're a master admin. And I will say, like, I am the only person on our staff that makes processes. We just have one person do it, and that person is me, because they are difficult. I see that coming in on the chat. They are difficult. But they are this is honestly my favorite part of the database. So I am going to watch the time because I could talk about these for a long time and go over different examples. But so create a process. So we'll just call this Katie's process. And then so the name you can change. This you cannot change though once you hit save. And I'm going to say 95% of the processes that you're making should be hidden. What this means is that if a person signs into the database and looks at their profile, if they are a part of a visible process, then they can see what step they're in. Not that you're hiding it from them, but it's just not information people need to know. So pretty much everything will be hidden processes. So then you hit save, and then you have a blank canvas. So before I even create the process, I am taking a notebook and I am writing out what the steps are in that process. Like maybe you have a volunteer process, or with your connection process. What are the things, I want to do a text message, or I want to do a phone call, or I want to mail them something. You're just writing that out. And then you're looking at it and going, okay, now I really do one for, so I really do the text message and the mailing a card at the same time. Like when I'm working on it on a Monday or a Tuesday, I do those together. So really, I would just make that one queue. You don't need to have every single minuscule step as its own process queue. That was a huge learning for us when we were doing process queues. I think the first process we made had like 50 steps. That's an exaggeration. It probably had like 20 or 25, but it now has 6. So drastically combined those. So you're first writing it out on a piece of paper or a whiteboard, whatever. And then you're coming in here and you're going to click add new queue to this process. And then you're going to go, so first step. And then I just do, there is a limited number of characters, so you don't want to put too much information here, but you want to give enough to know what it is. So text cast. And then you hit enter. And then we're just going to do second step. And then I forgot one thing that I always do. And this always happens. So you're just going to add everything and you just type it, hit enter, type it, hit enter. And then you're going to come in here and check reorder queues, see on the right side. And then what I like to do for my queues is have like a heading. This is purely just organization and visual appeal. So here's my heading, the weekend gathering process. Then over here on the right, you can see these arrows, and I just click it in 3. Now, then I'm done. I'm going to hit done reordering queues. Now, I never have anything go into this weekend gathering connection process. That is purely just a header. And then I only indent them because it goes with them. It makes no difference functionality wise if they are all lined up, if they cascade, like if it goes like this, like none of that matters. How it visually looks is it only matters visually. It doesn't affect the functionality or how you use it. It is only what makes sense for you visually and what you want to look at. So then here are our steps. Yep, these look good. I'm going to go in my first step, and then I'm going to add a queue manager. So Mickey Mouse is on my team. He is going to handle this first step because who wouldn't want to get a text message from Mickey Mouse? And then because I want to set Mickey up for success, I'm going to do edit this queue. And I honestly don't really know why there are 2 different boxes for description and instructions, but you put in the instructions. So text person, you could do like waiting means no response. Like if you have to have a response before you want to mark them as done, you could put something like that. Or you can do add notes about conversation. 3, we want to mail the welcome card. 4, and we're going to mark, oops, mark is done. And all right. And then details. When somebody gets added, I want them to do it right away. I'm going to check both of those as well because I want the queue managers to get notified. And then when they're done, I don't have an email attached to this. And I do want to make sure that their membership type stays guest. And then I want to add them to my second step. And I don't want that to be an option. I want to be sure that they're going into their next step. And so then I hit save. And then that's set up. And so then I'm just doing that for each of my queues. I'm going through and I'm adding the instructions and I'm doing each step. And then I'm going to my form and connecting my form to my process. So what that looks like, let's go over to forms and go to this one. And then in my form, I'm going actions, edit this form. You can also do it another way, but this is just how I always do it. I just think it's easier. All right, so if somebody checks new to Trinity Church, so this question, I'm going to click this. So I don't want them to go into this process queue anymore. What I want them to go into is my first step. So you just start typing it. And if there is, let me see. Yeah, so you can see these are all of the process queues that we have that have the word first in them. So you can just keep typing, or you can see right down here, it says process, Katie's process. So then I know that's the correct one. So I select that, I hit save, hit done, And there you go. So now if somebody checks that they're new to Trinity Church in this form, they will go into our new process. So I first write everything down. Let me go back to this. I first write everything down on a piece of paper. Then I create my process. And then I attach my process to my form. You would also, if you had groups, CCB groups, you would have to be sure those were created as well before you attach them to your form. So I tend to have my process and my form on two screens when I'm connecting them, just to be sure, yep, that is where I want that question to go, and I'm just lining that up. But that's just how I do it. See, there's question after Easter, offer a webinar on VBS. I can do that. I will tell you, our process is a little involved, but I would love to. I love VBS, and we use every single aspect of the database for VBS. Do you ever, okay, got a question from Melissa. Let me put that up on the screen. Do you ever put people in a queue waiting for them to do an action? I send out links. Yes, absolutely. Yep. And that is a perfect example. Sending out those links. Yep. That is exactly how I would use that. We're waiting for a response. Or if you require references in a volunteer process, you could have them be waiting when you've notified them that they need to send out, or you're waiting on their references, or and then maybe you could use in process. You gave them a reminder email that we don't have their references, and then you would move those people to in process as like a second, just to kind of keep track of how long people have been in those. That's a way you could do that. Are people added to a process by filling out the form and add an automation? Is that the only way? Great question. You can add people to the process hold on, I gotta share my screen. There we go. You can add people to a process by, let me go into here. You can manually add them to the process queue by clicking this add a person to this queue right here, and then you can type in their names, and then you can like add a specific note about them. You can assign them to a specific queue manager if you wanted. So you can add them this way, or you can add them by going back to people and going to people search. You can do it through a search. So will this show up? Yeah. When you run a search, one of the actions you can do is add to a process. And so you can add them to a specific process queue. So we do this for our like new children that come on Sundays. So our registration volunteers will run a save search of profiles that were created that day, and then they add them to the new families process queue. And you run the search. So you could click a save search and then run this one. So run a search and then click actions, add to process. And then thankfully it does it through the process name first. So we'll do Katie's process, and then you can see these are all the options. So remember, this first one is just our header. So that's maybe that's a little confusing and you don't like that. That's fine. But I want to add them to my first step. You can select if there's a specific manager for them, what status you want to add them to, and then add a note, and then you would hit add. And then it tells you. And then we can go right to that queue and you can see them all right there. So that is how that works. So after the last step of the process, is a person automatically removed from the process queue? No, no one is ever removed from a process queue unless you remove them. So when I mark somebody as done, oh, I don't want to do that. Hold on. Let me turn off this automation just because I don't want to change their membership types. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm going to mark them as done. So over here on the right-hand side, you can see it says 1 not started, 2 done, and 1 unassigned. So this is where Mickey and Minnie will live forever. And then if you want to, oops, didn't mean to do that. If you want to remove someone, so let's say Pammy Mouse got in here by mistake, you can check them and then remove them. You will notice there's no confirmation. Like, it didn't ask me if I was sure if I wanted to remove them. So use that little button carefully. Because there's also no undo for that. Like, I have to remember, oh, wait, I accidentally removed Pammy Mouse. So you could get yourself into some trouble with that. All right. When parents fill out a child registration form, they can check a box to volunteer. That puts the child in the queue. Then I look at which parent filled it out and drop in their name. Yep. So that is a way you can see. Oh, this is where I want to be. You can see in our connection process. Oh, wait. This one. In our student connection process. So for students, the student is the one registering, and then we have a queue where its parent information is added to the profile. And sometimes that's just confirming it. Sometimes it's adding the student to the parent household. So we have that as a separate step. But yep, that's a great example of a process queue. Yeah, thank you, Melissa. Yeah, these are great questions. And I can definitely do more in process queues because, like I said, I love them. I think they are a great tool. They certainly have their limitations because it's not fully automated like a sales funnel if you have that background. But I do think they're super helpful. We used them in the pandemic with, let me see if I can find that one. I think it's archived. And I don't want to look through that list. We used it in the pandemic to check in with everyone. So we had all of our staff, elders, deacons, and then like our care volunteer team. We had access to the process. And every week we called or texted every single person in our church as much as we could. I think everyone got at least 2 touch points every month because we were shut down for quite a bit. So, and that we did that all through process queues. So it was a way where we ensured that nobody fell through the cracks. That's what I think the biggest advantage of process queues is. You can ensure that nobody falls through the cracks because that's keeping track of the details. Because if you're anything like me, your ministry list is quite long. And unfortunately, sometimes the people who that's why we're here can fall through those cracks. So this is a way, process queues is a way to just help you think through those details and remind you like, hey, you haven't contacted this volunteer in a while. So you can follow up with them and that's all just set and you can have that be monthly. You could have that be weekly, whatever is sustainable. So we'll do more things on process cues, but if you guys have specific questions, feel free to put a question in the Facebook group or shoot me an email. I'd be happy to answer any quick question. And I'd also be happy to set up a call with you guys for your specific church context and just kind of give you my recommendations on processes that you could set. I will definitely do a more in-depth process queue. I think we might have that one scheduled at the end of April. But yeah, I'd be happy to talk further with you guys if you have specific questions for your context, or maybe you have a process that you're currently doing with Excel spreadsheets or whatever. I'd be happy to talk through how you could translate that into a CCB process, because I'm sure there's a way. So thank you guys. Appreciate your encouragement. I'm glad it's been informative. I am going to sign off. We've hit our time. I want to honor your time. But I appreciate you guys taking the time to spend some dedicated time on CCB, because we are better when we do this together. So I hope you guys have a great week, and I will talk to you guys later. See you at the next webinar.